So you may wonder, if giant swords are so impractical in real life, why is nobody complaining about large polearms? Here's a big reason why. Here's the heaviest polearm I currently have. Weighs only about half of that giant wooden sword, but for demonstration purposes, it'll do. Now, of course, the mass distribution is different for a polearm than it is for a greatsword because you have much more of the mass here, whereas a sword is balanced the opposite way. The balance of a weapon is always a compromise between power and agility. If you want to make it impact as hard as possible, you put a lot of mass at the end, but that makes it really clunky to wield and makes you slow and unresponsive. If you do the opposite and pull the balance far back, it becomes very lively and easy to maneuver, quick, responsive, but it just doesn't hit very hard. Doesn't matter for a thrust, of course. So if I take this war scythe in one hand and try to hold it out, it's very difficult because it's a long lever that amplifies the gravity pulling on my hand. If I use the other hand as well, now I have 2 points of contact, now the leverage is much more in my favor. The further I space the hands apart, the easier it is because I shorten the lever here, which means I don't strike quite as hard, but it means I have much more control over it. So what's the nice thing about a polearm? You can adjust. I can hold it here for defensive purposes, but then as I strike, I can move the position of the hand. So if I want to maximize the striking power, hands go pretty low, but if I say I miss and I need to pull it back up, I can right the hand up as I retract it, which makes it much easier. You know, as the hand moves further up, it gets easier and easier for me to control it. How do you do that with a sword? You don't. They put an unsharpened ricasso, sometimes even leather bound, and parrying hooks on some historical greatswords so that you're able to hold it further out, shorten the lever, and make it easier to maneuver, make it faster. You know, whether it's underhand or overhand, you can do more with it. Also, it helps with parrying. The lower the hands are here, the longer the lever as said, which is good for striking but bad for defense because then the opponent can use that lever against you and control your weapon. Whereas if you hold it higher, you can hold much better against it. So you can withstand more force with a static block, but you can also withstand attempts by the opponent to gain control over your blade by binding it and using that lever against you to manipulate it. I can't just slide the hand, obviously. I need to let go of it to pass the guard and then grip it again. So this is much more awkward than changing grip just like this, which also allows you to use sliding thrusts. And it's just overall, it gives you a lot more options and makes it easier to handle. Of course, polearms have some disadvantages too. You just have a wooden haft as opposed to a steel blade, which is more likely to break. Some polearms have langets, which reinforce the haft and make you better able to defend against an enemy blade. So with this, you can fully use your reach, but if they evade or parry and try to move in, you have the option to pull it in close to still use the blade or strike with the other end. Of course, with a sword, you can do that too. You can strike with the pommel, but there's a reason why it's usually done like this, because now you have that much more leverage to strike with it, and rather than just doing this weak little push, you can really lay into them. So at that point, you're using the sword like an improvised polearm. I've made a video about how real historical greatswords were used to counter pikes. The important thing to keep in mind here is that greatswords were not the rock, paper, scissors kind of direct counter to pikes, and they were in fact used alongside polearms like halberds. Pikes are extremely long and unwieldy, and once the enemy gets past the point, they become completely useless, which is why pike formation included other weapons as well, like polearms and greatswords. I'm telling you that to acknowledge that there is in fact a place for greatswords. However, all that gets much more difficult when the sword is oversized, and many fantasy giant swords have a handle that's not really long enough to accommodate that. The Buster Sword, for example. The handle looks long, but for the size, not so much. Just like in this case, I made the handle pretty long, but even so, it's barely enough to really deal with the size and weight and balance. It becomes much easier to hold it like this, whether it be retracted, ready for a strike, or to defend Like blocking like this, much easier, because now you can actually brace it properly and don't have to fight the weight at the end of a long lever. Again, assuming that the thing is not as heavy as it would be if it was made of all steel. It needs to be some lighter metal alloy, or like I said, a lighter core with heavier edges, stuff like this. Even when it's made of just wood, it's really clunky already. What puts large swords and polearms in direct competition is the size. Obviously, polearms have an advantage over long swords or even single-handed swords, but smaller weapons are much more portable. A long sword or some other kind of shorter weapon can be easily worn on the body, whereas a polearm, all you can do is carry it in hand, maybe rest it on the shoulder. That's true for historical two-handed swords as well, of course, but giant fantasy swords are even worse. You pretty much have to carry them slung over your back or your shoulder at the very least, with all the disadvantages that come with that. And a giant blade is even worse, because at least with a polearm, as I said, you can handle any part of the haft more safely and conveniently than a sharp blade. So in short, to pick a giant sword over a polearm, you have to be a real edgelord. Let me know if you subscribe to polearm superiority, or if there's some kind of actually you wish to get off your chest in the comments below. Either way, hope you had fun. Thanks for watching, and take care, folks.